Name's Cassidy Braver, and the day I brought lunch to my husband's car wash, I realized something between us had quietly snapped. It wasn't dramatic, just a dull space where warmth used to be. He didn't come out right away, which was weird. Like maybe he saw me pull up and stayed inside. A minute later, it was Nolan who showed up. New guy, clean cut, had that easy smirk like he knew when not to say too much. He thanked me for the food, cracked a joke about the heat, and handed me a bottle of still water. Remembered I don't like the bubbly kind. That detail stuck with me, more than it should have. Then I heard laughter from the back of the building, a woman's voice, light, familiar with the place. I asked Trevor about it that night while he was peeling an orange with too much focus. He shrugged. Client. That's all. No defensiveness, no curiosity. Just that flat, dragging silence we'd both gotten too good at. We finished dinner without finishing the conversation. Neither of us brought up the untouched lunch I brought, or the woman's laugh, or how he didn't kiss me goodbye that morning. I saw Nolan again at the gas station later that week, right when the sky looked like it had given up trying to be anything other than white-hot and still. I was trying to pour myself a cup of coffee with hands that wouldn't quit shaking, and the lid kept popping off like even that small task was too much. He stood a few feet away, pretending to examine gum flavors, but I could feel him watching without judgment, just quiet awareness. Eventually, he stepped closer and said, almost like it was a throwaway comment, "You know, sometimes it gets quieter in your head once you say the loud stuff out loud." I didn't answer him, partly because I didn't know how, and partly because if I started talking, I wasn't sure I'd stop. That night, he sent me a meme on Instagram. Some silly thing with a cat in sunglasses talking about how caffeine and chaos are the real breakfast of champions. I laughed harder than I wanted to admit and sent back a simple emoji, but that was enough to open the door. Messages followed, first spaced out, then more often, then regular. We never crossed any lines, not exactly, but the subtext was starting to hum between the words like a wire stretched too tight. Eventually, I asked if he wanted to grab something to eat, somewhere where no one we knew would show up and ask questions. We picked a diner out past the last strip mall, the kind with cracked leather booths, chipped mugs, and a jukebox that only played country songs from the 90s. The place smelled like cinnamon and something fried in old oil, but it was comfortable in a way I hadn't felt in months. We talked about everything and nothing. Family, small regrets, music we'd forgotten we loved. It felt like catching your breath underwater, even though I wasn't sure I was supposed to be breathing at all. When he drove me back, I didn't move to get out right away. I waited just a second too long. He leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to stop it. The kiss wasn't dramatic, just real, careful, like he knew I was still halfway somewhere else. I kissed him back for one long second before pulling away fast enough to make it feel like maybe it hadn't happened at all. But it had. And I knew then the silence in my marriage wasn't just silence anymore. It was distance. A few days later, Trevor told me he wanted to show me something. A side project, he called it, like he suddenly had hobbies that didn't include checking out of our life or working overtime at the car wash. I didn't ask questions, just followed him to the edge of town, where an old sun-faded trailer sat parked beside a half-dead tree and a crooked mailbox with no name on it. The inside was what you'd expect. Dusty, stale air, a half-finished paint job, boxes stacked in corners like someone had left in a hurry or never fully arrived. But what caught my eye immediately, so fast it was almost a punch, was a bright pink coffee mug on the tiny table by the sink. It said, "Dream big, girl in curly script," with chipped gold trim and a lipstick smudge that wasn't mine. I stared at it just long enough for Trevor to notice, and without even looking up from the cupboard he was pretending to fix, he said flatly, "Oh, that? Belonged to some intern who helped out a few weeks ago." That was it. No pause, no explanation, just that dull, practiced kind of response people give when they've rehearsed the lie too many times to make it sound natural. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask who she was or why her mug was still there or why it was sitting out like she might walk back in at any minute. I just took a photo of it when he wasn't looking and sent it to a few close friends. Not for answers, but confirmation. Because deep down I already knew, and I didn't want to be talked out of what I could see clearly for the first time in months. The next morning, our neighbor Rachel showed up while I was taking out the trash, holding a mug of coffee she didn't drink and asking in that too casual tone how I was doing. And then, like she was just passing along a weather update, she said, "Kimber? Trevor's little intern? Heard she might have moved in with him." I nodded like the news didn't hit me square in the chest, like I hadn't already guessed, like it was just another detail in a week full of them. I didn't yell or cry or throw anything, because by that point, the hurt didn't feel sharp anymore. It just felt heavy. By the time everything with Trevor started openly unraveling, Nolan had become more than just a passing presence. He was showing up with casual reasons that didn't feel so casual anymore. offering to carry boxes I could have easily managed, or handing me my mail like he just happened to be driving by, even though he lived nowhere near my street. I didn't invite him in. Not even once, but one afternoon we sat in the backyard where the grass had gone brittle from too many forgotten waterings, and he brought tea and mismatched mugs he claimed he got from a thrift store because they looked like they had stories. We talked like people who weren't pretending anymore, about things that didn't come up in polite conversation, like what it felt like to grow up in a house where leaving was normal, and love came with conditions no one said out loud. He told me his father left when he was 11, vanished with nothing but a suitcase and a half-assed note, and the only contact after that was a phone call 3 years later asking if Nolan had seen the remote. I laughed harder than I should have. Not because it was funny, but because something about the absurdity of it cracked through all the numb. That evening, when the sun dipped low and the backyard turned the color of old photographs, he leaned in again, this time slower and with a kind of weight that felt less like a question and more like an answer to something neither of us had dared say directly. I kissed him back, not hesitating, not pulling away, letting the moment stretch just long enough to wonder what I was really stepping into. And then he asked, not accusing, not needy, just a quiet, steady question that didn't let me hide. Are you just lonely, Cassidy? Or do you actually want something new? His voice didn't shake, but mine did when I finally answered, not because I didn't mean it, but because I realized how true it was, even as I spoke. I'm not sure I remember what new is supposed to feel like anymore. A week later, Trevor said he was leaving for a work trip, using that same flat voice he'd been speaking in for months, like everything he said was filtered through static. He packed light but deliberately, folding shirts with a kind of practiced calm, and when I walked into the bedroom that night, half the closet was empty. The half with the shoes he never wore but always kept polished, the jackets I once gave him, and the cologne I hadn't smelled in weeks. There was a note on the kitchen counter, not folded, just left out like a receipt. If you ever decide you want to talk, don't text. Call. Or don't. I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because it said everything he hadn't been saying for months in a single line that offered nothing and asked for even less. Rachel showed up later that day, knocking with her elbow because her hands were full. A loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil, still warm, like comfort could be baked into something and handed over without questions. She sat at my kitchen table without taking off her sunglasses, didn't eat a bite, just watched me like I was a puzzle missing one piece she couldn't quite find. After a long silence, she finally said, "You've got that look in your eyes, like something ended, or maybe just started." And I couldn't tell if she meant it as comfort or warning. I didn't reply. I didn't want to give it words because saying it out loud might make it too real, and part of me still hoped this was a phase or a fog or something temporary I could wake up from. Later that evening, I noticed Nolan had started acting different. Not obviously, but enough that it left a space where there used to be energy. His replies came slower, his tone felt distant. And even though nothing had officially changed between us, something had shifted in that quiet, unsettling way you can't quite point to, but still feel in your chest. The next morning, I glanced at his laptop while he was in the other room and saw an open tab for rental listings. In another state, hours away. No passwords, no secrecy, just sitting there in the browser like he'd forgotten to close the truth. He didn't lie about it, didn't try to explain, and maybe that was worse. Nolan left 2 days later, not in a storm of emotion or with any dramatic goodbye, just a quiet exit that felt more like a closing door than a departure. He stood by the porch steps, hands in his pockets, eyes not quite meeting mine, and said, "I thought maybe you were looking for something real, but maybe I turned into that real too fast." And even though I wanted to argue, I didn't, because deep down I knew he wasn't wrong. He didn't leave a note, didn't send a message later, didn't offer one last explanation. I didn't need one. The only proof that he had ever been here at all were the things he didn't take. A coffee mug with a chipped rim, a toothbrush that leaned too far to one side in the holder, and a sweatshirt that still smelled faintly like the cologne I had once found comforting before I realized how temporary comfort could be. I stared at those leftover pieces for longer than I cared to admit. Not because I missed him in some desperate way, but because they felt like a question I couldn't answer. How something that felt like a beginning could end without anyone slamming a door. A week later, I sold the house without a second walkthrough, packed up what I could carry without thinking too hard, and signed a lease on a small apartment in a different part of town, one with low ceilings, bad lighting, and just enough space for a mattress, a coffee maker, and silence that didn't echo. I got a job at a mechanic's shop, the kind where no one asks what you used to be before you showed up with calloused hands and eyes that don't blink too often, and I took it without blinking myself, because I needed something that required my body more than my mind. Now, I drink my coffee alone on the balcony before the sun gets too high. in a chair I found on the curb and fixed up with duct tape and sandpaper. There are no kisses, no awkward pauses, no half-truths folded into casual sentences. There's no background music either. Not because I hate it, but because life feels clearer when it's quiet. I don't regret anything. Not really. I don't smile without a reason, but I'm not pretending either. This isn't a beginning or an ending. It's just the part where things keep moving, even when no one is watching.